What began as a simple allegory has steadily morphed into something much more complex: the definition of the biological enemy itself. In the early drafts of CONPLAN 8888, the most obvious inspiration was rabies. Long before gene editing became part of the conversation, rabies stood out because of how it rewires its host: confusion, aggression, and violent behavior followed by death. It provided a plausible anchor for instructors who needed a recognizable disease to build their fictional outbreak upon, and it grounded the zombie idea in biological reality rather than pure fantasy. But by 2025, rabies serves only as an echo of the past. The focal point has shifted toward organisms with origins not in wildlife but in laboratories, a reflection of how military planners think about risk in an age of biotechnology. This shift parallels real-world advances in genetic engineering. Over the past decade, CRISPR turned what had once been laboratory speculation into practical technology. Its precision meant that organisms could be altered with far more control than older methods allowed. That capability carried obvious medical promise, but also raised security flags. If benign microbes can be edited, then the same tools could, in theory, produce pathogens designed for resilience, stealth, or psychological disruption. While CONPLAN 8888 never names CRISPR outright, its broadening of the pathogenic bucket after 2011 reveals an awareness that the line between natural and engineered threats has blurred. Instructors no longer treat zombies simply as mutated rabies victims, but as placeholders for lab-derived organisms whose effects could strain civil order in ways a wild virus never could. Historical experience reinforced those concerns. Gain-of-function experiments, created to anticipate future mutations by engineering them in advance, have been defended by some scientists as necessary preparation. Critics counter that the margin for error is razor-thin, pointing to real incidents like the 1979 Sverdlovsk anthrax leak in the Soviet Union or documented near misses in American labs. These incidents remind planners that accidental releases are not hypothetical. A leak from a high-containment facility, whether spore-forming bacteria, a misfolded protein, or an engineered viral strain, could spread under conditions closely resembling a zombie horde. Instructing officers to think through the logistics of responding to that scenario does not sensationalize the danger, but rather prepares them for what history proves can occur. Prion add another layer of unease. Unlike viruses or bacteria, prion are proteins that fold incorrectly and trigger degenerative brain diseases. In humans, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a known example, and in animals, chronic wasting disease has raised concerns about cross-species transmission. Engineers speculating about manipulated prion highlight the possibility of deliberately triggered neurological collapse. Symptoms like aggression, cognitive failure, and disorientation look disturbingly close to the behavior imagined in zombie case studies. By broadening the taxonomy of threats to include prion, planners acknowledge that destabilization could come not from a classic virus at all, but from something harder to detect, treat, or contain. This is where facilities like the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center, NBAC, become critical to U.S. planning. Located at Fort Detrick, NBAC houses biosafety level 2, 3, and 4 labs capable of handling some of the world's most dangerous agents, the kind for which no vaccine or treatment yet exists. Its mission is explicitly defensive: analyze emerging threats, conduct bioforensics on suspicious samples, and model the effects of pathogens to guide preparedness. At the same time, the simple fact that such work must be done underlines the dual-use dilemma. To study how a tailored pathogen might spread, researchers must work with risks that, if mishandled, mirror the very catastrophes CONPLAN 8888 encodes behind the zombie metaphor. For planners, NBAC represents both reassurance that expertise exists and a reminder that absolute containment is never guaranteed. Alongside research facilities, global intelligence assessments have repeatedly reinforced why the military includes bioterror considerations in its training documents. A 2007 national intelligence estimate concluded that groups like Al-Qaeda would use biological weapons if capable. Since then, the threat profile has expanded to lone actors or state proxies equipped with portable aerosol dispersal tools. Ventilation systems in public or commercial buildings remain high-profile vulnerabilities. A pathogen seeded into an air intake requires no complex missile system, only a rudimentary sprayer. The damage would be silent, efficient, and immediate. When CONPLAN writers describe zombie spread through sharing air, The practical meaning is plain: aerosolized release through ducts or public spaces, a threat that still occupies counterterrorism briefings today. What makes the more recent revisions striking is not just the broader list of agents, but also the recategorization of older playful labels. Terms once written as tongue-in-cheek placeholders, prionic zombies or evil magic zombies, now function as coded categories for neurological agents, unconventional toxins, or unexpected vectors. The word choice is absurd on the surface, but the subtext is one of classification. Officers are trained to map unfamiliar pathogens against a taxonomy of scenarios without exposing those details to public panic. This allows military classrooms to address sensitive topics like engineered proteins or novel delivery mechanisms in a camouflage layer of humor. Yet with novelty comes persistent caution. International treaties like the Biological Weapons Convention exist precisely to place boundaries on research and deployment of biological agents. Oversight, regulation, and biosafety audits are not side notes. They surface repeatedly in Defense Science Board findings and other DoD documents. To acknowledge engineered threats in a plan like CONPLAN 8888 is not to declare they are imminent, but to make sure officers practice responses within ethical and legal frameworks that protect against misuse. Maintaining that balance between preparation and escalation is the tension underlying every biosecurity conversation in modern defense circles. What emerges from this? Reframing is a subtler picture than the popular imagination of zombie armies. In truth, the military's concern is less about cinematic hordes and more about pathogens resistant to medicine, organisms designed to disrupt cognition, or engineered releases that attack infrastructure through the air. Zombies act as shorthand for problems no single category of doctrine can contain. For trainees, the exercise means learning how to ask the right questions. Does an outbreak spread invisibly before symptoms? Will it resist antivirals? Which chains of authority activate when public order breaks? Those are the real scenarios hidden under the disguise. By replacing rabies with lab-derived adversaries, CONPLAN 8888 reflects an acknowledgement of how biological threats have evolved. Rabies once highlighted the devastation of natural infection. Today, the pressing concern is innovation, organisms designed intentionally or released accidentally from the very labs studying them. As the technology to build, edit, or release grows more accessible, the military treats these risks as part of its collapse scenarios. The language of zombies keeps the conversation light to outside readers, but the internal translation points straight at engineered hazards. The end result is that what started as allegory in 2011 has matured into a constant rehearsal for the consequences of biotechnology. Officers who once planned around wild animal vectors now practice responses to hypothetical, but plausible, lab accidents or engineered pathogens. Publicly, the zombies remain. Privately, the exercise functions as doctrine for bioterror prevention and continuity under genetic uncertainty. This evolution matters because any outbreak serious enough to destabilize domestic life does not stay confined to lab discussions. It lands in the streets, the hospitals, and most of all, the military installations tasked with holding the line when everything else begins to fracture. That is where the next set of questions lies, not in defining pathogens on paper, but in determining how secure the institutions themselves truly are once the gates must be closed. Securing the gates, base defense in an age of biological threats. Floodlights glare across a quarantine perimeter. Armed patrols adjust their routes, drones trace measured arcs above, and loudspeakers cycle instructions to personnel behind the wire. The image is familiar in training simulations, but its meaning has shifted. In 2011, the earliest draft of CONPLAN 8888 treated military installations like static fortresses, closed the gates, cut access, and the facility would endure until order returned. By 2025, that logic no longer holds. Perimeter walls and locked gates may slow entry, but they do little against 21st century threats like drone incursions, cyber sabotage, or pathogens carried past checkpoints by insiders. Updated doctrine now stresses that bases must operate less like sealed castles and more like layered continuity hubs, defending not just their fences but also utilities, digital networks, and the vital systems that keep operational cores functioning. Planning documents increasingly describe bases as nodes of strategic continuity. Each one supports fuel distribution, communications, medical stores, or housing for deployments. If those nodes falter under pressure, the ability to project national power falters with them. The COVID-19 years reinforced this lesson clearly. Bases discovered how quickly infections, supply chain breakdowns, or even rumors could fracture their function. The 2025 revisions take those vulnerabilities seriously, folding them into the mask of zombie outbreaks, but clearly referencing asymmetric attack vectors. Drones carrying payloads, cyber breaches disabling gates, or panicked masses surging toward fences all surface in scenarios coded in fictional language. The metaphor holds, but underneath it sits a sober rehearsal for disruptions that have already proven real. Access control sits at the center of this defense. New guidance emphasizes layered systems, not reliance on visual inspection or metal badges alone. Multi-factor authentication, fingerprints, retinal scans, or other biometric standards appears across NATO's Defense Against Terrorism Program of Work, DAT-POW, projects and U.S. Doctrine. These measures can be paired with temperature screening or biosensors, creating what the exercise describes as infection checks at the gate. In reality, the goal is to catch imposters, infiltrators, or symptomatic civilians before they add pressure to the installation. Scenarios call this zombie containment, but officers interpret it as an evolving requirement for identity integrity and health screening, especially during chaotic evacuations. Aerial defense shows the same doctrinal expansion. Radar arrays once calibrated for high-performance aircraft now must track small quadcopters carrying improvised payloads. Counter-UAS systems, researched and refined within DAT-POW and demonstrated in U.S. trials, are increasingly referenced in CONPLAN training modules. Signal jamming, directed energy intercepts, and rapid launch counter-drones are no longer speculative tech expo concepts, but recognized baseline requirements for contested perimeters. Within the zombie framework, this is presented as airborne contagion vectors, a way to prepare officers for a future where drones smuggle surveillance devices or disperse hazardous material over a base otherwise locked down. The fiction conceals a present reality. Drone vulnerabilities already figure prominently in base security assessments. Utilities form the next weak point. During the pandemic, disruptions to power, water, or supply transportation quickly reduced base capacity without a single hostile act. That experience led planners to emphasize redundancy, not universally installed everywhere, but expected where feasible. Updated CONPLAN language treats utilities as mission-critical supply chains equivalent to food stocks or fuel. Guidance encourages installations to develop microgrids, secure power backups, water purification systems, or hardened communications redundancies, each scaled to base size. The script retains its outlandish cover, bases surviving after fictional contagion collapses city grids, but the instruction behind it is practical. Continuity requires off-grid capacity when national infrastructure fails. The link to NATO's wider counter-terror initiatives is deliberate. The Defense Against Terrorism Program of Work has focused on technology to mitigate non-conventional threats, including UAS, improvised explosives, and CBRN substances. Exercises funded under this program have tested electro-optical detectors, sensor nets, and even augmented reality tools for situational awareness. CONPLAN 8888's updated playbook cross-references this body of research. Inside the text, patrols repel infected mobs, while in practice the exercise is modeling interoperability with detection systems, chemical sensors, and CBRN monitoring tools relevant to real-world base security. That overlap ensures the camouflage language continues to mask serious integration of capability development. Civilian pressure adds another dimension. Historically, contingency plans gave little attention to what happens once desperate outsiders gather at gates. The newer framework recognizes that crowds are inevitable. Civilians see bases as refuges and will move toward them in search of security or aid. Without structured intake, that surge itself could destabilize an installation. Training scenarios reframe the crowd as zombies, pressing against checkpoints. In operational terms, the playbook now describes multiple layers: off-site muster stations, screening at pre-identified corridors, and segregation between cleared civilians and military personnel. Bases are not meant to serve as endless camps, but protocols acknowledge a balance. Manage incoming civilians in controlled areas or risk uncontrolled breaches. Medical containment underpins this balance. Installations must preserve their own operational health bubbles, the same concept institutionalized in NAVADMIN 217/20 at the height of COVID-19. Restriction of movement sequester policies, sometimes lasting weeks, created closed environments around deploying units to block infection vectors. That same policy now connects directly to the gates concept in CONPLAN script. Before civilians are admitted during crisis simulations, they are filtered through biosecurity corridors meant to prevent collapse from within. Training codes this as checking survivors for bite marks, but commanders know the real objective is to enforce RUM protocols at entry points when contagion risk is highest. Treat bases as protective bubbles, and ensure screening keeps those bubbles intact. The image of logistic hubs overwhelmed by sick civilians is not only theoretical. During 2020, bases found themselves balancing humanitarian aid deliveries with force protection requirements. The updated zombie scenarios encode those conflicts directly. Scenes of infected civilians demanding entry are metaphors for triage decisions confronting officers. Who is admitted, who is quarantined, and how resources are allocated when medical care and supplies cannot keep pace. Emphasizing filtration nodes, secondary muster sites, and staged intakes is an attempt to instill decision-making habits before the crisis arrives. All of these defensive layers, access control, anti-drone measures, utility redundancy, and controlled civilian intake, reinforce the same instruction. Installations must remain operational even when surrounding institutions falter. They serve as continuity anchors, housing command systems, secure communications, and essential stockpiles until external order can be restored. Locking gates is no longer preparation enough. Security in 2025 means defending networks, protecting supply chains, countering aerial intrusion, and absorbing a degree of civilian pressure without collapsing from inside. Within the language of zombies, these steps read like theatrical drills. Guards test thermal scanners at a gatehouse to identify infection. Drone intercept systems practice neutralizing airborne carriers. Microgrids or fuel reserves are described as supply caches to outlast hordes. But behind the camouflage is a serious program of modernization, one that builds on NATO's POW initiatives and US DoD guidance. Bases remain the last protective rings around military continuity, and the updates acknowledge they will be tested simultaneously across multiple dimensions, not just physical attacks but biological, digital, and civilian-driven pressures. The effect is a blueprint for survival hubs rather than passive fortresses. The gates no longer mark the line between safety and chaos. They are screening thresholds, filtration systems, and negotiation points between order and desperation. And while the mask of fiction makes this acceptable training material, the actual dilemmas are drawn directly from experience over the last 2 decades. Which entry procedures hold when thousands arrive? How are drones countered while fuel systems are failing? When quarantines expand beyond capacity, what authority governs the response? These are the rehearsals concealed under the zombie narrative. The framework, however, points to a further gap, one not solved by biometric scanners or drone defenses. Because even if a base holds fast, even if the perimeter remains intact, the larger challenge remains waiting outside the wire. Collapse scenarios do not end at the gates, and no installation stays secure in isolation forever. That recognition leads directly to the next question planners had to confront: how nations move, shelter, and stabilize the millions left beyond the checkpoints. Civilian evacuation, the missing link. The weak point in the earliest version of CONPLAN 8888 was not its use of zombies or its stylized descriptions of ruin. It was the way civilians were addressed. The 2011 public draft devoted most of its focus to sustaining installations, securing airports, and designating military hubs. Civilian evacuation appeared only in passing, mentioned but not structured into the kind of sequences that govern military continuity.